Shalom, dear friends. Who am I and what do I have to offer you? Well, if I start speaking too much about myself, then we won't have enough time to learn our first shiur in this series. So I'll just keep it down to the more important and essential and especially relevant things to what we want to study. My name is Netanel Elyashiv. I was born in upstate New York in a small town called Binghamton in 1975. That makes me 49 today. I made Aliyah with my family in 1984 as a child. We grew up in a town called Ra'anana, a lot of Anglos living there. I'm sure many of you have relatives or friends living or who have lived in Ra'anana. And at a rather young age, I was drawn to the Beit Midrash, to the yeshiva world, based on the teachings of Rav Kook, Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, and his son Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook. I didn't know any of them personally, but I did study their books and their ideas, and my rebbes, my teachers, were their talmidim. So I'm a Rav Kook guy, basically. So I studied in these yeshivot for quite a few years. In the middle, I went for a full army service. I'm a sergeant in the Israeli paratroopers unit. Reservist and all that stuff. And I taught at the Bnei David institutions in Ely. That's the pre-army yeshiva program at Ely. I taught here for about, precisely 19 years. And 2 years ago, I started deepening my other pursuits. I'm a writer and I'm a small publisher. The books you might see behind me were written by myself or edited by myself. We have two publishing houses. One is for Torah works and specifies in Rav Kook the main ideas of Rav Kook and his Beit Midrash. And we have another one called Noga Books, more for the general public. And I'm also very much connected to the Jewish community in America. Whenever I have a chance, especially in the month of Iyar with Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim, I make a journey, a speaking tour. I've been in quite a few communities and states and cities across the U.S. because I feel an obligation to mutually strengthen the bridge between the two largest communities of Jews in the world, of course, us living here in Israel and our brothers and sisters still living in the United States. And therefore, since I know the communities pretty well in America, especially the modern Orthodox communities, I know their strengths and things that we ought to learn from them. But I also know that they're missing a certain vitamin. It's called vitamin K, vitamin Kook, Rav Kook. Meaning they know about him, but since it's very difficult to understand Rav Kook, even in Hebrew, if you're an Israeli, it's definitely much more difficult to understand his ideas in English. There are some good translations, even some excellent ones. Anything written by Rabbi Betzalel Naor from Orot Publishing House, that's definitely excellent. There's Rabbi Yaakov David Shulman. There are all the Torah tidbits speakers who some of them have published books. So there is quite a lot of literature today, and there's a growing interest in Rav Kook's ideas in Torah, and yet his ideas are a bit difficult to understand, and especially if you want to understand his original writings. And I didn't mention maybe the most important thing. I have a Beit Midrash. In the past 2 years, ever since I left Bnei David, I still wanted to keep on teaching Torah systematically. And so I established a virtual Beit Midrash called Binyan HaTorah. We have a YouTube channel and currently about 700 people studying with us in Israel. And if I connect everything that I said up till now together, then I really want to give our new series, the one that I'm about to introduce, I want to give it in English as well. My English, as you might have already noticed, and if you haven't noticed it yet, you will notice it soon. It's okay, but it's not perfect. I've been living in Israel for quite a few years. I read a lot in English. I speak a bit in English. I speak in America in English, and yet I'm not really living in English. Especially my Torah study was all done in Hebrew, so it's not natural for me to teach Torah in English, but it is important, so I'll make the effort, and you'll be forgiving if I'm not top-notch. Anyway, this series is based on an exchange of letters between Rav Kook and a man named Rav Dov Ber Milstein. We know about Rav Dov Ber Milstein because of his correspondence with Rav Kook. We don't have his letters to Rav Kook, but we have Rav Kook's letters to him. And he was dealing with a crisis in his family. Reb Dov Ber Milstein, he wasn't like a professional rabbi, but he was definitely a serious chassid and a Talmid Chacham. So Rav Dov Ber Milstein, he was from Poland. And he was from Poland. Let me here get to my facts about him. He was born in 1855. He died in the same year as Rav Kook in 1935. And he was a chassid from a chassidut that we don't know much about. It's called Parasov. But we do know that Parasov was both geographically and spiritually connected to that area of Kotsk, the Kotsker Rebbe, and Radum, and Gura Kalaveria, which is Gur, the Ger Hasidim, and they were all Talmidim of Rav Simcha Bonim of Fashischa. It was a strong Hasidic community in Poland. And, every seriously from Yid, his biggest dream is that he will have children who will continue in the way of Torah and mitzvot and emunah and be Hasidim like he himself. And he worked with his first son, who was born after 12 years of marriage. He had a son named Chaim Ze'ev, who was a Hasid like him. But his next two sons that were born, one of them was called Shmuel or Shmulke, and the other was Naphtali. They started to stray away. They started to stray away from Yirat Shamayim, from Torah, from Emunah, from observance of mitzvot. And this caused extreme distress to Rav Dov Ber Milstein. By the way, I mentioned before that seriously from Jews, the most important thing for them is that their children continue. It's actually not only the people we would consider as like ultra-Orthodox or seriously from. As a teacher, I can tell you that I often met parents who, at least externally, you wouldn't judge them as being very religious or very Torah-centered. And yet their religious identity was very, very important for them. It was important for me to understand how important it was for them. And when they saw one of their children straying away from Torah, it caused them deep pain and distress. And it's important to know. So everybody reaches his own level in Torah, but whatever he reached, it's important in his eyes that his descendants keep on going with it. And it's a crisis when they stray away. Now, of course, this wasn't happening only in the Milstein family. At the beginning of the 20th century, it was happening big time to all of Klal Yisrael. And back then, it was pretty much a one-way bridge, meaning there were a lot of people leaving the religious lifestyle and becoming secular, sometimes even assimilated, sometimes reform, all kinds of options, but straying away from the traditional observance of Torah and mitzvot. And as opposed to today, when it's a two-way bridge, because we have a lot of people from the secular world who are trying to get closer to traditional Torah and mitzvot. Back then it was a one-way street, meaning people were leaving, and they were leaving in very big numbers. And it was happening all across the Jewish world. It was stronger, the influence of this was stronger in Western Europe, but it was also happening in Eastern Europe. The myth that as if that in Eastern Europe, everybody was frum, that's not the truth. It happened to them later, it happened to them differently, but it happened to them as well. Even in Poland, I'm speaking about pre-World War II, Poland, they sometimes try to, describe it as if everybody was still connected to Torah. That's not the truth. The majority of Jewish children in the 30s in Poland, they were learning in general schools, meaning not even a Jewish school of any kind, definitely not a religious Jewish school. And parents who sent their kids to a general Polish, Goyish school, they knew that the chance that their children would keep on being observant, the chances are very slim. And that was going on. I won't even begin to describe what was happening in America. People were arriving the shores of America knowing that it's a treifa Medina, it's a land where you can't keep Torah and mitzvot. That was the general view at the beginning of the 20th century. We know that has changed and largely, but though not largely enough. Anyway, that's the way things were. There was a leader of Mizrahi back then, the youngest son of the Naziv of Volozhin. His name was Meir Berlin. Later on, he changed it to become Meir Bar Ilan. And he said that he used to sometimes visit those large boats leaving Europe and traveling to America. And a lot of Jews were on those boats in Europe, looking for a new future in the new world. And sometimes he saw Jews that he knew. They were, Torah and mitzvot, observant Jews, and he saw them on those boats eating treif food. And he asked them, why were they doing such a thing? And they said, because we heard you can't keep kosher in America, you can't be an observant Jew in America. And he said, but you're not in America yet, you're still in Europe. It's easy to obtain kosher food. But, even being on your way to that ship meant to many Jews back then that we're leaving our traditional way of life, and you all know Fiddler on the Roof. All right, we won't get into this whole description of what was going on in that generation, because we're trying to study it via this specific family, the Milstein family. Now, Rav Dov Ber Milstein, his Rebbe was probably Reb Avram of Borisov. He was the Rebbe who began his tenure in 1905. And he told him what most of the religious leaders of the early 20th century were saying to their students. He said, if your sons are straying away from Torah, you have to be very, very harsh with them. You have to be very strict, and you have to tell them that till they do tshuva and start acting like Erliche Frumer Yidden, then you're not going to help them out, and you're not going to be in contact with them, and you have got to be harsh with them. That was the old method, and some rabbis thought that might work, but it wasn't really working. And luckily for Rav Dov Ber Milstein, he traveled to Eretz Yisrael in 1906. He was, I don't know if I can say he was wealthy, but he was in a good financial situation in those years. He had, he was in the business of cutting and lumber and trees in the forest. He had a serious business he was running in Warsaw. So, and he was described as somebody who would, recite Mishnayot even when he was busy working with the trees. And I mentioned his financial status, first of all, because his children wanted him to help. We'll see that later on in the letters. And second of all, I think that the fact that he could make the travel to Eretz Yisrael in 1906 was because he was in a good financial status. Anyway, when he was in Eretz Yisrael, he met the rabbi he was the rabbi of Jaffa and the Moshavot, meaning the new Yeshuv, those who were busy with not only with Torah study, but also with agriculture and economical development. Some of them were still religious, some of them were traditional a bit, and some of them were totally secular and even anti-religion. If you know the story of the Aliyah Shniya, the second Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. And when he met up with Rav Kook, and he told him about his children and how worried he was about their spiritual situation, they were apparently in their late teens back then. Rav Kook told him the exact opposite of what his Rebbe was saying. He said, you have to treat them with love, with chesed, and draw them closer, and don't be harsh with them at all, and help them with... We're going to get into that in the letters. So Milstein had to decide between two strong influences in his life, his Rebbe on one side and Rav Kook on the other side. and that's the basis of the letters we're about to study. Rav Kook strengthening him and explaining why this is the right thing to do when your children start to stray away. Now, the reason that I believe very much in studying these letters, I could have maybe taught Ma'amar Hador. Rav Kook has a very famous essay, The Generation, speaking about the conflict or the tension that was between the older generation and the newer generation, the fathers and the sons, those who were connected to Torah with all their heart and all their soul, and those who were straying away. So we could have studied it via that essay or other sources in Rav Kook, but there's an advantage to studying it through these letters for 3 reasons. First of all, this isn't theoretical. We're dealing with a specific family. Now, it's true that when Rav Kook is writing about these 2 kids, these two young adults, it's relevant for so many others. That's why we're studying it. And yet, studying it through the story of a specific family and a specific case, that can be very enriching and powerful. Reason number 2 that I love these letters so much is what I call the babushka effect. Babushka, that's literally in Russian, I think it's a grandmother, but it's also a name for the matryoshka doll. A matryoshka doll, I asked my assistant, Claude, that's an AI tool, how I would say that in English, and he said, if you say Russian nesting dolls, then you folks are supposed to understand me. So these are like wooden dolls. Often it's a grandmother, that's why it's called a babushka also. So you have this wooden doll, but when you open it, then you discover there's another one inside, smaller, but similar. And then you open that, and there's another one inside. So this is the way I want to, this is what I call the effect in these letters, because you can see here that Rav Kook doesn't reveal all of his secrets on the first letter. Okay, he doesn't, here we would say in Israel, we have all these military parables, he doesn't shoot out with all of his ammunition on the first round. From letter to letter, you see that what he wrote in the first letter is actually the result of a much, much deeper thought system than you could imagine when you read the first letter, because in the second letter you understand it's much deeper, and the third it's even more deep, and it keeps on going this way. Now, you can see this in Rav Kook's writings and speeches quite a few times, but here it's very vivid in these letters, and that's another reason that I like them very much. And third, we have a value called Shimush Talmidei Chachamim, meaning it's not enough to understand the information conveyed by Torah scholars, but you got to do Shimush, you got to understand who the Rav is. And from these letters, from letters in general, and specifically from these letters, you can understand that about Rav Kook, because Rav Kook can be taught in many ways. At the end of the day, you gotta read the writings themselves, and you have to understand who the persona is behind these writings. And I think these letters will help us understand that as well. So that's, I think, enough. I will say that some of the things that Rav Kook said, which were very, very big chidushim, they were new in his era. They're almost common knowledge. I mean, that most of the religious world today believes in the ideas that Rav Kook wrote in these letters about almost 120 years ago. Okay, so of course the Lubavitcher Rebbe went in this path. I'm not saying that he was influenced directly by Rav Kook. I'm just saying that Rav Kook was the first one who said that it won't work in this generation to be rough with the kids who are straying away from Torah. You got to love them. You got to understand them. You got to give them a path that they can follow and not your own path, not necessarily your own path, because they apparently can't walk down that same path. So of course, Lubavitcher Rebbe went in the same way. And also in the Litvak world, you know, if you ever read Rav Gershon Edelstein's instructions to parents who are beginning to lose their kids to the secular world. If you ever read the works of Rav Uri Zohar, I think he established an organization to deal with this. And today, this is widespread. They don't even know to attribute it to Rav Kook, but we're learning the original ideas here. And still, even today, there are many chidushim in these letters. So we're going to try to deliver the shiur about once a week. It's supposed to be a weekly shiur. May Hashem give me the strength and ability to do it both in Hebrew and in English. And you can follow the shiur by joining our silent WhatsApp group. Okay, we're going to have a link posted at the bottom of this video. And you can also subscribe to the YouTube channel. And I think that's enough. And that's enough for now. Every shiur, every lesson will have a source sheet. It'll also be at the bottom of this video on YouTube. And at the end of these shiurim, I don't know how many we'll have in the series. I'd figure about 10, but I'm not sure yet. I didn't break it down to shiurim yet, and I definitely didn't deliver it in English till now. So at the end of the series, we're going to have a booklet published as a PDF with all of the sources together. But we're also going to have a source sheet for every shiur. So please open your source sheet, and it's written both in Hebrew and translated to English. Okay, we're on shiur number 1. It's called Internalizing that they have chosen a different path. And the translation to English, the Igrot, the letters of Rav Kook, have not yet been published in English, not yet been translated. I think somebody's working on it really now. I heard that. But anyway, I did use the help of Claude from AI. I mentioned it before. But I read the translation. I made some corrections to be sure that it's okay. He did a good job, a frighteningly good job of translating these letters, and yet there were certain things that he couldn't understand, and I helped out a bit. So it's like 80-90% Claude and 10-20% myself in this translation. We're going to read it both in Hebrew and in English. At the beginning of the source sheet, you can see a picture. Sometimes a picture helps you understand who you're dealing with. And this is a picture of Rav Dov Ber Milstein. You can see this is a Jew of Torah. This is a Chassid. You see the long beard, the Haredi look. This was who the man was. Like we said, he was running a business, but he was essentially deeply enrooted in the traditional Judaism and the Hasidic world. And we're going to begin today with Igeret Nun, which is letter 50. Bezrat Hashem, Ira Kodesh Yafo, Rosh Chodesh Shvat Tarsaz. The era of Jaffa, in my eyes, was the most fruitful and beautiful in Rav Kook's life, both in his personal life and in his writings. Because he was then in his 40s, Rav Kook, and he was at the top of his game. He was already established as a tremendous Talmid Chacham, and if in his 20s he was still struggling to find his path in Torah and Emunah, it's of course, there's much to learn from his writings in his 20s and his 30s, but in his 40s he was, like I said, at the top of his game. And he was in Eretz Yisrael, and he was dealing with that special group of Olim who were ideological and with strong values and wonderful people, but often totally straight away from Torah. And often they were really opponents of traditional Judaism. So that mixture, like it's not like he didn't know about those Jews in Chutz La'aretz, but in Jaffa and the Moshavot, there was a different type of Jew being created before his very eyes, and he had to deal with it. And therefore, it was also these were also the years before the terrible machloket that ruined his last years. I'm speaking about the 20s and the 30s of his 60, like when he was like 55 and 60 and till his death. Actually, his son Rav Tzviuda, he thought that his premature death at age 70 was due to this machloket. He had a lot of opponents when he was the Rav of Yerushalayim and later on the Rav of all of Eretz Yisrael, and they were the zealots. They were very, very problematic people, and they distressed him deeply. We'll talk about that some other time. I'm just trying to say that this era, which we're studying about, Rav Kook and Jaffa, this is, in my view, these are the best writings and the best era of Rav Kook, and that's why I use this picture. This isn't a very well-known picture of Rav Kook, but this is from this era of I think it was taken in 1908. This is when he's writing these letters and writing Ma'amar Hador and writing genius, almost, prophetic, is that the way you pronounce it? Prophetic, prophecy, diaries. Anyway, this is being written in Shvat Tafresh Samech Zayin, which would mean the beginning of 1907, to my honored friend, the distinguished rabbi and community leader, our teacher and Rabbi Dov Ber Milstein. May he live long, peace and blessings. Shalom uvracha. I have received your precious letter, writes Rav Kook in response, regarding what you asked for my counsel concerning your conduct with your sons. I already told you when you were here with us that my approach is to conduct oneself specifically with the attribute of complete kindness. In the Hebrew, the original Hebrew, it says, B'midat hachesed hagamur im hatzirim. With the young ones, don't be, what's the opposite of chesed? The opposite of chesed is midat adin. Midat adin, meaning being strict, being harsh with the young ones straying away from Torah, and that was essentially the counsel of his Rebbe. And Rav Kook said, I think the complete opposite. You have to have chesed, and not only chesed, but chesed gamur, complete kindness. You got to just be there with love, with chesed, and to tell them that there are several good things in their inclinations. What were the Milstein sons' inclinations? So from what we know, there's research about them. In our last shiur, I'll tell you what happened with them, though that's not so important, because like I said, we're trying to understand the story of the whole generation through these two young gentlemen. But anyway, they were apparently very much influenced, like many others, by socialist ideas, maybe even communist ideas. They were very strong with Jewish youngsters back then, and that's one of their inclinations. The other one would be Polish nationalism, which was also becoming strong at the beginning of the 20th century. Poland was devastated by its neighbors, and the Polish people they're very proud people and very strong, and they want their country back. And many of the Jews felt patriotic regarding Poland. So these were their inclinations. But mainly the first one, meaning social justice and bringing equality and justice to all. Left wing. So Rav Kook said, not only should you be kind to your kids, you should tell them that there are several good things in their inclinations. We're not accepting everything that they're saying, but the basic ideas of wanting equality and wanting justice and wanting goodness to prevail and wanting your average citizens to have a good life and also wanting good for your country, even if your country is not Israel, which didn't exist back then. These are good things. And the religious world usually didn't, even those who did believe in chesed and not in din, it was just like being nice to your kids and loving your kids. But this is a big chidush, saying that in your will, your strong will, the value system that you're developing, which seems to be different from the Torah value system. So there are several good things in their inclinations. And their main error is only that they think that the good things that they feel are opposed to the Torah, when in truth they are themselves the essence of Torah. Hem heminam gufei Torah. where did these kids get the idea that their inclinations for social justice and equality and all the values of the modern world and the left wing, where did they get the idea that these things are opposed to Torah? This isn't their fault. This is the Torah world's fault. Meaning Rav Kook is placing some of the responsibility on the Torah world. Meaning that we were teaching the Torah in a narrow way. And when people started to broaden their viewpoints regarding the world, the Torah world, it took it too long to understand that actually many of the things that their younger generation, the younger generation was speaking about, they're embedded in Torah values. If we would study not only the Talmud but also the Tanakh seriously, if that would be part of our curriculum, if we would study the teaching of where did all these social values come from? They came from the Tanakh. They came from the prophets of Israel, from our Nevi'im. If we would study this seriously, if we would understand that Ben Adam Lechavero is not less important than Ben Adam Lemakom, that Torah is based on V'asita Yashar V'atov and Mishpat U'Tzedakah and Chesed and all, these are all fundamental Torah ideas. And the Torah world was on the defensive in the beginning of the 20th century, and maybe it still is, parts of it are still that way today. And therefore, sometimes people who are trying to defend the Torah world thought that you have to narrow your view. And the Rav Kook says, no, it's the opposite. Torah is much broader. It's much wider than the way we teach it. And if we would have teach Torah this way, then maybe they wouldn't have to look for these values and ideals in other places. Because the most natural thing for anybody is to continue in the way that he was taught, the way he was grown up. Of course, every generation, they had their special and specific, footprint in Torah. That's wonderful. That Yagdil Torah v'Yadir. But the natural thing is to stay connected with your family and your tradition. And if so many people, like I said, we have a lot of examples from the military here in Israel. So there's the idea of seruv pkuda, so disobeying orders. You get a specific order from your commander in the army and you disobey. Everybody knows that that's a bad thing to do, and you usually are sent to prison, to an army prison for seruv pkuda. But there's also a saying that if it's one soldier who is disobeying his orders, then it's the soldier's problem. But if all the soldiers, or the majority of the soldiers, are disobeying their orders, that means that there's a problem with the commander. That doesn't mean that it's okay for them to disobey the order. But if you see something that many people are doing, so that means that there's a problem with the system. Unless you want to say that all these people are evil or stupid or extremely naive. But if you have respect for your people and you say they're good people at their foundation, maybe the Jews were naive, but good people and smart people. If you see that these good and smart people are looking for solutions out of Torah, that means that there might be a problem. Now, maybe Reform Jews would say the problem is in the Torah. Rav Kook would never say that. But Rav Kook would say the problem is not in the Torah, but maybe the way we understand the Torah, the way we are learning Torah, the way we are teaching Torah, it's too narrow. And the Torah, if we study it seriously, we'll know that it includes all of these ideals and values. Again, maybe not in the exact way that these new movements are bidding for, but nobody was telling these kids that the deep inclinations that they feel within themselves are positive, and they're part of our Torah world. And Adrabah, we want you to teach it to us because you're the mumchim, you're the experts in this, and we need the chizuk from you. It's not a one-way process. So we might teach you what we know about Torah, but you're going to develop a whole new, we would say here, a floor, a koma, a path in Torah, teaching us how the Torah and traditional Judaism go together with these wonderful inclinations. That's what Rav Kook believed in. And therefore, even though it is proper, I'm continuing here in this letter, even though it is proper to give them freedom, chofesh, to learn writing and languages and secular studies according to their soul's desire. That's what they wanted to study. They were expelled from the yeshiva because they weren't studying the Torah in their yeshiva. They wanted to study secular studies. Now, all the traditional Jews knew that the gate to leave observance of Torah was learning Russian or Polish, to learn these foreign languages and to read the secular literature and studies. That was the way that paved your way out of Torah observance. And Rav Kook says, look, you have to internalize that your children have chosen a different path. And you have to respect that. And they have to know that you respect it. And therefore, you should allow them to learn languages and secular studies. He didn't give them permission to learn things that really are opposed to Torah. He didn't say that they should learn kfirah and heresy and things like that, or other religions, or avodah zarah chalila. He's just saying, you're allowed to learn secular studies. And maybe you, Rev Dov Ber Milstein, would prefer that they would learn at a yeshiva for all their life, or at least in these formulative years. But you have to understand that your children have chosen a different path. And if you keep on dreaming that they're going to come with you to the mikveh every day before the tefillah, and they're going to come to you to the Rebbe for the tish, and they're going to eat the shiraim and feel me'ein olam haba, and they're going to sing all the nigunim that you they enlighten your soul, and they will, well, they're not. They're far from that. And when you speak about these things, it doesn't relate to them. And therefore, you should allow them to learn what they want to learn. You have to respect that, and they have to know that you respect it. But nevertheless, it is proper that they, on their part, should show their love for Judaism and the commandments. Meaning, if you say, I give no place to what is important to you, then don't expect them to give any place to what is important for you. I hope this worked, this sentence. But when you respect what's important for them, then they should also respect what's important for you, meaning traditional Judaism and the commandments, the mitzvot, at least for the fundamental and more serious ones. Meaning Rav Kook is saying, look, they're apparently not going to be mekayim all of the halachot and the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and but at least the fundamental ones, Shabbat, eating kosher, taharat hamishpacha, the basic things that keep you a part of the religious community in Am Yisrael. For in this they do, it says here, kindness and justice. I'm not sure that's a good translation. With the entire Jewish people. And one must explain to them, according to their level, meaning don't use my words because they won't relate to them. Use words that they can relate to, but the idea is to explain to them that to do eternal charity with the nation. Which nation? The nation of Israel. By causing on their part that the things that are sacred to it from ancient times should remain within it. This is an upright thing for every person. These words, even in Hebrew, they're a bit vague, and in English I see that it doesn't work very well, so I'll explain the basic idea. What Rav Kook is saying here is that the Jewish nation has a deep fundamental connection to its spiritual values and to the observance of mitzvot. You can't really imagine Jewishness without any connection to Torah and mitzvot. Like he says here, and a Jewish person must feel this uprightness in an even greater way. This is an upright thing for every person to respect the tradition of its nation, and his nation, and a Jewish person must feel this uprightness in an even greater way, because in any case, even the most degraded among us can find that we have some distinction from all nations in spirituality. I was a big collector of comic books in my childhood years. Even here in Israel, I would find the places where you could buy comic books. But, there are two large companies, I suppose there still are, there were back then. There was Marvel and DC. and I was a Marvel guy. And therefore, when I saw the comic book that I want to describe now, it was I didn't buy it. It was by DC, and I regret that I didn't buy it because it was some kind of an army title comic book. And that specific issue that I was looking at on one day, I was maybe in 5th or 6th grade, it had the Jewish army, it might have been the IDF. I really don't remember exactly what was going on, but it had a Jewish army. And how did the artist draw a Jewish army? So all the Chayalim, they were all with tefillin on. It was a beautiful picture. That's why I say I regret I didn't buy it. And I suppose that though there were many Jews in the comic book business, I suppose that that was actually not a non-Jew artist. And, you know, he was told by the writer, you got to have a drawing here of an illustration of Jewish soldiers. So he asked himself, what would a Jewish soldier look like? And it was natural for him to put on the tefillin. Though in those years, the vast majority of Chayalim in the IDF, I don't think they were, they would... today things are changing, but I don't think back then that they would have tefillin even in the morning, and definitely not with their uniforms on and in their army service. I'm giving this as an example that when the Jewish nation is portrayed by others, they all know that we have a connection to even anti-Semites or like the Palestinian propaganda. You can see that when they draw the Jews, they have religious. Of course, they have the long noses, and that's totally anti-Semitic. But they also portray usually Jews with peot or with kippah or with tefillin or with a tzitzit, because that's a natural way to look at a Jew, even though most of the Jews today don't look that way. So I'm giving these as examples to say that it's clear that we have a special thing with Judaism, with spirituality. It's not like a guest in our world. It's very natural. And this distinction is not proper for any upright person to cause to be debased on his part. Again, the English in this sentence doesn't work very well, but what he's saying is, you know, you got to keep it alive. You're part of a tradition of so many generations. It's a miracle that you're even here, okay, when you think about what the Jewish people went through with. So this is part of our identity. This is part of our national identity. And it doesn't begin with your personal belief in a specific mitzvah or you know, you're part of the Jewish nation, you got to keep it alive. And you can't keep the Jewish nation alive without keeping at least some part of the, substantial part of the Jewish tradition incorporated in your life. And we see it doesn't work. We see it doesn't work if you're totally not connected to Torah and mitzvot. Then you end up losing your identity. I often quote a tweet by an American Jewish comedian named Sarah Silverman. In this tweet, I think it was like 3 years ago, she writes, it was in September, she writes that she was at a coffee shop, and probably Starbucks, and she ordered coffee, and a bit of the coffee spilled, and it was very hot. So naturally, what does a Jew instinctively say when hot coffee spills on her hand? She said, "Oi, oi." And when she said that, somebody approached her and said, "Excuse me, did you just say oi?" Who is this person? What does he want? Maybe it's some Jew hater. But she admitted to it, and she said, "Yes, I did." So he smiled to her and he said, "Then have a happy new year, Shana Tova." Apparently it was a non-Jew who knew that it was Rosh Hashanah. And she said, "I didn't know it was Rosh Hashanah." She knew what Rosh Hashanah was, but she didn't know that that day was Rosh Hashanah. She had to have that guy in the coffee shop say Shana Tova to her, so she'll understand. I'm not trying to, single her out. Many Jews, maybe the majority of Jews in America, would be in the same situation. You can't keep your Jewish identity alive without some connection to tradition. And therefore, Rav Kook says, don't be the one to break this. This is like going it's a relay race. That's what they call it, merutz shlichim. From generation to generation, they're passing on something. Don't be the one that breaks it. You should uphold at least the basis of this tradition. So therefore, one should conduct oneself together with enlightenment, haskala, and new arrangements in life according to the times, meaning accepting the modern. You got to understand something about Rav Kook. He was misunderstood by many people. He himself was not a modern person at all. Meaning the way he lived was like pretty much extreme Haredim. That was his everyday life. And he wasn't connected to the modern world. He wasn't a traditional like Torah V'Avodah or Bnei Akiva person or modern Orthodox. He was Orthodox. But he understood that for many people in this generation, the way for them is to connect the Jewish tradition with the enlightenment and the new arrangements in life. And you should accept that. השכלה והסדרים החדשים בחיים לפי הזמן, אבל בכל זאת להנהיג את עצמם בדרכי ישראל. You don't have to stray away from Judaism altogether. Keep some kind of connection. That's what he's saying. That's what can influence them. Now, of course, we would want much more than this, because we believe in Torah on the higher level. We believe ki hem chayenu ve'orech yameinu. This should be essential, a main part of your life. It's not like just, it's some kind of a museum and you got to keep it clean because don't make it dirty because it was clean when you found it. This is a bit about almost politeness or derech eretz toward your tradition. But we believe so much more in the Torah. And therefore, Rav Kook says to Dov Ber Milstein, he says, this is a very low level. I'm not saying that this is the peak of what we should aspire for ourselves. This is a very low level. At the extreme of lowliness, tachlit hashiflut, that when parents speak to their children according to it, they will find listening ears in them. This is a low level of connection to Torah, but it's one that's universal. Meaning, your kids will understand this. Again, you got to speak in a way that they will understand. But this idea is one that anybody can understand. But if they refuse, the parents, now he's talking about the parents, if they refuse with a strong hand, this is a wrong translation. I'll give you the right one in the source sheet. It's not refuse. Im yovuv, on the contrary, if they wish with a strong hand to raise them above their level through inner enthusiasm of holiness that the fathers feel in their hearts, it will not help them at all, but only harm them. What he just said here, I'll just put a note here to correct the translation here. So he says, if they insist, that's the right word. If the parents insist with a strong hand, they're going to be very tough, and to try to force their kids into observance because they feel it so strongly. They have an inner enthusiasm of Kedusha streaming through them, and therefore they're trying to bring their kids to their kids won't understand that because it's a different generation now. And not that all kids can't understand it. His first child could understand it. We're not giving up on strong Torah values. We're just saying we got to understand who our kids are. And that's a very interesting thing that Hashem does. He gives us children that aren't exactly what we expected, because we all want our children to be pretty much like us, just more successful and better looking or stronger or whatever. But Hashem gives us children that are often different than what we might expect, and we have to make the adjustment. If you don't make the adjustment, you're going to cause trouble in your family. You got to understand where your kids are. And these two children, you see that these ideas of total Kedusha don't speak to them at all. So work with what can work with them. Al ken ashrei adam shomea la'atzati bazeh. Happy will be the person who listens to my counsel in this. For thereby you will save his sons from decline and draw them with love little by little. You see, Rav Kook believes in a process. And we'll see that this process isn't only one of the children's lifetime. He's thinking about generations, little by little to the ways of Israel. Eventually, when they come of age, they will improve their deeds. Okay? You got to keep them on the wheel. You got to keep them part of Klal Yisrael. You got to keep them inside, even if their connection is weak. Later on, it might become stronger. And their children who will be born will be able to be better than their fathers. That's what I'm saying, that Rav Kook was playing chess while others were playing checkers, if they were playing at all. And he's thinking about, the next generation. And he knows that Often, if there was one generation that was too traditional, then the next generation might rebel against it and become very secular. But just as they rebelled against their parents, and the times were changing, the times are going to be changing again. And therefore, their children will rebel against them, and they will return to Torah values. But they will only do that if they're still part of the Jewish nation, if they don't intermarry, if they don't totally forsake their heritage. So you got to keep them inside the system, keep them as a part of Klal Yisrael. May the Almighty help us to turn the hearts of the transgressors of our people to complete repentance. And here Rav Kook is speaking more about the full version, because here it's like the conclusion of the letter. And therefore he can say what we hope in our heart. Till now it's been practical instruction, and he says, of course, we want tshuva shlema, complete repentance, and may he hasten his salvation for us in truth when the Redeemer comes to Zion, to those who return from transgression in Jacob. So in Hebrew, the word here is pesha. He mentions la'atot levav posh'ei ameinu, and then he says bevol etzion goel, it's part of our tefillah, uval etzion goel uleshaveh pesha b'Yaakov. There's a reason for this, that he's repeating the word pesha twice. There are different ways to describe people transgressing the laws of Torah. And the reason he says pesha, he'll explain it in a future letter. I conclude with the blessings and love, your friend who seeks your peace with love. Hakatan, the small one, humble, Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook. Thank you for being with me for this first shiur, and Bezrat Hashem will continue and we'll discover the babushka. We'll start understanding that beneath this, pretty simple, this is just like good practical advice that any counselor should be able to deliver, at least today, after we've learned much in the past 100+ years. But in the next following letters, we'll understand that behind this, there is much more deeper thinking and sources from the Niglev Torah and from the Nistar of Torah, from the Talmud and from the Zohar and from Kabbalah. It's all, Rav Kook internalized all of the sources, all of the Torah, and then it came out from him in a new way. But this new way is not totally new. It's based on a lot of Jewish sources and thought. We'll get into that in the following letters. Thank you.